Hi, Dave. Hi, Diane. Hi, Nay. How are you?
Hello.
Would you like to introduce yourself and let us know what interests you about tonight?
Dave in Tacoma here. Looks interesting. I'm a retired engineer, and I kind of interested in philosophy, psychology, and learning, things like that. So I thought I'd drop in for some free time this afternoon. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Oh.
I apologize. I just introduced myself. I'm Diane Bush. I attended St. John's. So I had some free time today and this looked interesting. So here I am.
Great, welcome. Both Dave and Diane.
Do you all know about critical thinking skills? Have you tried them?
I have not been educated on what a critical thinking skill is, but I think idealistic, that may be a thing I try to do, but I will be interested to learn more about it.
Could you repeat your question?
I was just asking if you're familiar with critical thinking skills and if you're using them.
Certainly, in everyday life.
Hi, Bobby. Hi, Shaunik.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Would you like to introduce yourselves and say what interests you about tonight's topic?
I'm not really even sure what tonight's topic is.
Oh, we'll be discussing critical thinking skills.
I'm just trying to learn new stuff.
Oh, well, you're in the right place. We do different topics every week. We welcome you.
Thank you. I'm in New Jersey.
Great, I'm in New Jersey too. I'm in North Jersey.
I'm in South Jersey, Atlantic City.
Cool.
Hi, Trevor. Hi, Anna. Hi, Daniel. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Oh, very well, thank you. This is Daniel. I don't think you've been here before. Is this your first time?
I've kind of come in every here and there. I'm not very consistent, no. So it wouldn't be a surprise, I think, to many if they don't recognize me. But I've kind of popped in every here and there. So I've been involved in maybe 2 or 3 discussions.
Oh, that's nice. Do you know about critical thinking skills?
Possibly. Depending on how we define it. It's quite a nebulous concept, I'd have to say. At least from my standpoint, at the very least, I'm not quite sure how one might begin to try and outline what critical thinking skills are, other than that it seems to be in some way a kind of mode of mental activity in which individuals try and more or less see the underlying maybe connections between certain notions and distinctions that might arise between specific concepts, like justice, equality, fairness as a case example. So yeah, just to summarize, to some extent, I guess I'm familiar with critical thinking, but I'm more interested to see what other people have to say about it.
Oh, well, you're in the right place.
Thank you. And how about your guys' selves? What's your background with respect to critical thinking?
I think Garrett has more of a background than I do.
So it's a large topic, and that's why it's going to be a multi-event topic. Tonight, we're just talking about sort of what are critical thinking skills, and then we're going to have multiple subsequent events where we're going to talk about different ways to improve our critical thinking skills. Just talking about what they are, as a bunch of you are alluding to, is a difficult challenge. And so I'll make my best effort, and I'm taking from a variety of sources, some of which is from my own thinking about it, and then some from other sources as well.
Yeah, and critical thinking has a long history as well. It's kind of been an idea or an activity, if you will, that's evolved over time, especially if you look at the way that critical thinking has existed in the day of some of the ancient Greeks, and then up until the Enlightenment with Francis Bacon sort of introducing the quote unquote modern day conception of the scientific method. I feel like those have a keen relationship with respect to critical thinking. And also just, there's, in kind of how you described it, there's thinking about critical thinking as a concept, as a kind of abstract idea. And then there also are conversations that can be had about how do we improve critical thinking, and what are some of the things that are involved when it comes to critical thinking, like maybe text analysis, for example, or when you're analyzing arguments that people are making. So there are some concrete uses that you can make of when you think about critical thinking. I think I've said thinking like 3 times in that last sentence.
That sounds good. Would anyone else like to introduce themselves? I see some different names here. I see Richard, Mike, Kevin, Kelly, Gary, Emma, Diane. You all are welcome to introduce yourselves. Jean is here also.
So my name is Kelly from New Jersey. What we are talking about, I'm sorry, I was late.
Oh, we're talking about critical thinking skills tonight. It's a first of a series.
Okay.
Anyone speaking?
Nope, we're letting people introduce themselves right now, so feel free.
Hi, I'm Richard. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, pronouns he, him, his. Unceded land near Vancouver, Canada. I think this is one of my first times to this group, but I've been popping in and out of the Seattle philosophy groups from time and time again, and they've been connected with the one down in Australia. So just to see here what you're about. I noticed you were on YouTube as well. I've listened to bits and pieces of that. So
Cool.
that's
Welcome.
about it. But yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Gene Hammond. Gene Hammond. I'm on Long Island. I've written a book called Critical Thinking. But I think it comes down to a very simple concept, and that is the difference between facts and inferences. And most people, I think, mistake inferences for facts. They say, well, let's see, Max Scherzer, for example, is a cheater. and they think that's a fact, but it's not really a fact. It's an inference based on some behavior or something like that. And when people can distinguish between the inferences we all draw from facts and the facts themselves, then I think they're on their way to being good critical thinkers.
Thank you, Jean. If you're interested, I know you've attended a few times, you're welcome to co-host an event, maybe something about critical thinking, because we'll be having more events on that topic. So you're welcome to reach out.
Yeah, Jean, reach out to me if you want to, teach a little bit on critical thinking, like how to improve critical thinking skills specifically, or what our future critical thinking events are going to be about. So if you're interested in that, definitely reach out to me.
I would be interested. I like the idea that this is an open group and there are no so-called experts that are more expert than others, but
yeah, I'm going to present stuff, but it is an open group. Like, I'll present stuff, and we have a philosophy, being free thinkers, that everyone's allowed to accept and reject whatever their own judgment comes to the conclusion of. So I'm going to give a bunch of suggestions. Your book, I'm sure, has a bunch of suggestions, and ultimately all this world is full of is people who have a bunch of suggestions, even if they tell you that their facts are the only facts and the only reality. Those are usually the people that are a little too attached to their own ideas. It's better, I think, to let everyone come to their own conclusions, which is part of what I think critical thinking is coming to your own conclusions. But I'll get to that in a minute.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Who else wants to introduce themselves?
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Steve, live in Queens, New York. I've participated once or twice with FDI. I was part of a meetup group called Street Philosophers 101. It's actually based in Australia, and the organizer dropped out, and I got kind of talked into taking it over temporarily. And other than the extreme time zone difference, I'm just trying to get them to talk about these topics.
That was me, Steve. That was my group that I started.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You're
It's me. You can abuse me. I'm Will. Hi.
Sorry. Hi, Will. Very good.
Yeah.
Actually, I still haven't figured out how to get Meetup to switch the time system. What I'm thinking of is doing one more attempt at a conversation with the group, and pick the subject of AI and CGT and the chatbots, and how that's making what was already a difficult problem of determining reality, and how to discuss truth, making it supercharged and perhaps worse, or maybe using technology to make things better. But what are the tools? The question is, what are the tools that philosophy gives us that anyone could possibly use to analyze assertions or ideas that people that are thrown out, and analyze them. And we've got the examples of the early philosophy of besides Bacon that was mentioned, the scientific method from the Enlightenment. We have Socrates basically questioning people's closely held beliefs, and keep on questioning them, but of course that that sort of can antagonize people, and he of course ended badly because of that. You have the ideas of Aristotle of the logical fallacies, but my concern with that is people learn the logical fallacies in order to break them. In other words, a good rhetorician learns all of them and then says, these are powerful tools I can use to shut down my opponent. People like Cicero were very powerful very persuasive, but they'd learned all of these as logical fallacies, but they went ahead to attack their opponent's personalities, to use circular reasoning, to appeal to emotions, to appeal to authority. You know, the gods say we must do this, therefore you must do what I say. And therefore, just learning what the logical fallacies are is not a solution. So I was taken with one group called schoolofthought.org. They have a list of ideas of if people will agree to what they call the rules of civic conversation. They post these rules and say, if you agree to these rules, then we can have a civil conversation, even if we strongly disagree with each other, and maybe we can come to some conclusions and make some progress. But the problem is you have to know what those rules are, and then you have to get all the parties to agree. So
that's great, Stephen. I think you can also keep in touch with us if you'd like to co-host an event. You have a lot of knowledge.
Oh, very
on
good. I will do so.
Yeah.
To
Send
FTI,
me
right?
a message.
Yeah. So the question is, do people have some other, besides the obvious ones, Socrates, the three civs and things like that, do people have ideas of what are some easy things that we can teach people, that they can tools that people can use in all of the different things that get thrown at them to analyze them? So and I'll mute myself.
This is Kelly. I want to make one comment about critical thinking, skills. It sounds very, profound and needs very special. It sounds like it needs very special skill. But, if we ask ourselves, why, why should we, buy their idea? Why should we buy someone said what, So if we keep thinking about, keep asking to ourselves why, then we can really increase, their skill. And so, why is, I think it's very important to develop the critical thinking.
I agree with you completely. I think it's super important, especially in this day and age. Anyone else want to give a quick introduction before we get started? All right, then let me just pull up my. If there's anyone else, feel free to go. I'm just going to pull up my notes. So welcome everybody tonight. We're going to kind of kick things off. Thanks for participating in the social to those who participated, and for those who didn't, we would love you to participate next time and introduce yourselves. So to introduce myself, my name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor, now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and I'm also the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's event. And we are a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We really want to help people be the best version of themselves, seek truth, and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. And we also have weekly members-only events, which if you want to learn more about, I'll make a few mentions of in tonight's discussion. And Ellis will post more information about our members only events, which you have to apply to be a member. And that's basically to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. We have only one rule in the Free Thinker Institute, and that is to remain polite. That keeps us all in the logical portion of our brain rather than making emotional comments and discussions or decisions. And so I just recommend everyone keep calm and remain polite throughout the evening, and we have much better discussions that way. People are usually really good about that, but I do like to mention it up front. If someone's not polite, then we warn them, and if they continue to be impolite, then they get removed. So we do moderate that one rule strictly, but it's our only rule, so it is important to keep it in line. So I also like to recommend everybody do what we call listening to understand, which is to listen to other people's perspective and try to understand it with an open mind. We learn a lot more from listening to other people and asking them why they think what they think. And I'll also mention we have a quick thing that we do, and I also have 3 monitors, so I'm going to be kind of looking in all different directions. But we also have a thing that we do, like if you want to make a quick comment, like after the presentation, we hold questions until after the presentation. But then after the presentation, people are welcome to raise hands, and you can raise them during the presentation, but you'll be called on after the presentation. And then the idea is that we keep each comment or question to 1 comment or question at a time, so that we can keep rotating through comments and questions. And if you have something that you want to respond to what someone said, you'll use the reaction with the little party hat, and that'll be a sign that you want to, the one right there that I think Ellis just did. And so if you do that little party hat reaction, that means that you want to respond to what someone just said. Normally what happens is someone will make a comment, and then I'll reflect on that and sort of share thoughts on it. But if someone else wants to share their thoughts on what the person just said, just put the party hat up and we'll give you a chance to speak as well. But that just lets us continue the conversation through each person's topic, but make sure that everybody feels heard and acknowledged and listened to by either myself or the community or both. So with that said, I'm gonna set up my presentation mode.
Okay.
And you should be able to see my screen now. So what are critical thinking skills and how do we get them? We're going to do less about how do we get them. We're going to talk more about what they are and what they're not, a little bit about what they're not. And so I jump to the next slide. So there are sort of 2 main goals. I like to talk about goals, like what is the purpose of critical thinking? Like what are we trying to accomplish with critical thinking skills? And so the first thing that I think we're trying to accomplish is knowledge acquisition. And what that means is telling fact from fiction. What's real? We live at a time that fake news travels faster than real news, believe it or not. And because of that, it's really important to be able to tell fact from fiction. And it is not easy. There's a lot of smart people that get it wrong and have fallen prey to misinformation. It's very important. And that's part of why I think critical thinking skills are so important, because we live in this time where reality itself is often at question. But I think being able to see, fact from fiction is a key aspect of critical thinking skills. It's a key goal of them. I will also say that reality does not bend its will to anyone. And so being aligned with reality is actually really important. And I like to give the example of there are 3 philosophers in front of a door and 2 of them say that it doesn't exist and then try to walk through it and boom, they hit their heads, right? Like the fact is majority opinion does not make something right. Like reality is reality, and you either align with it or you basically end up suffering from not aligning with it. And so it's really important to have good critical thinking skills to align with the actual reality. Although I will say everyone has to use their own critical thinking skills and judgment to decide what is reality in this very complicated day and age. And we'll talk about different skills that each of us can use to do that, not only in tonight's session, but also in future subsequent sessions. We're going to have conversations about how to build our critical thinking skills, and we'll delve into some of the things that I touch on tonight in a lot more detail in the future sessions. So that said, aligning with reality really helps us be more successful in life, which increases happiness and decreases harm for yourself and those you can influence. So it is a really good thing to strive for, aligning with reality. Now, how do we acquire knowledge? Trusted sources and authorities, although I would, is one way, although I would always say don't trust blindly, and trusting those that don't have a motive to lie and have a reputation for being honest is a good thing to do. We'll discuss more about a vetting process for that next. And then number 2 is creating and learning from scientific experiments. They're pretty good at what they do, and they can be peer reviewed. So you can have someone try to reproduce a scientific experiment. If no one can reproduce it, chances are good someone was making up the results, which is very possible. You can make up results of an experiment and write them down. It is unfortunately something that's been done more often than I would like to think. But when you start to have other people reproducing those experiments that are trying to challenge them, and no one can reproduce them, then you kind of question the first guy. If people can reproduce them that didn't expect them to be reproducible, then you start to say, hey, wait, maybe this has legs. We found out something very interesting in reincarnation event the other night when I was researching for it. Turns out there's a lot of peer-reviewed research that supports that reincarnation is real, which I didn't know until I researched that event. So fascinating stuff. If people want to read about it, there are actually articles about it. So next is through the senses, through our own sensory experience, we can acquire knowledge. So vetting purported facts, I really think that a key aspect of critical thinking skills is to, as you take in new facts, understand the bias of the source that gives you those facts, and see whether or not the facts or the purported facts actually support their bias. And if so, ask yourself whether or not there are any sources without that bias that can agree with that fact. And if not, I would be concerned about whether or not it's a real fact or whether or not it's fake news. And, pay attention to which sources claim things that can't be agreed, that aren't agreeable by any sources without the same bias. A source that does that regularly is not a source to be trusted. And I would argue critical thinking skills, this is kind of an example of critical thinking skills in action. Sometimes an example is a good way to do it. I will talk about critical thinking skills in theory too later in the presentation, but this is sort of an example of critical thinking skills. And then if an unbiased source can agree with a surprising fact presented by a biased source, then it's more likely, or cannot agree with, I meant to say, I got the phrasing wrong, then it's more likely that the source is lying. If an unbiased source will agree with a surprising fact, then it's more likely that the source is accurate and that surprising thing really is true. Although I found when I fact check things that surprised me, from biased sources, most of the time those things turn out not to be true. Usually there aren't such big surprises. The things that shock us are often the things that are not real. So the next goal of critical thinking for me is wisdom acquisition. Well, what is wisdom? I like to say it's telling, a key aspect of critical thinking is to tell wisdom from folly. And so what is wisdom? Wisdom is about making better decisions. And the definition of wisdom actually says the quality or state of being wise, not very helpful. And then knowledge is knowledge of what is true or right, coupled with just judgment as to action. I can't pronounce that, sagacity, discernment and insight. And then I thought long and hard about what constitutes, good decision making. And what I came up with is the 5 intentions, which is to have the North Star be to be the best version of yourself, to seek truth and to be fair, and then to be transparent about who you are and what you believe to the extent that you trust someone, to have an open mind towards new ideas that will help you be the best version of yourself, seek truth and be fair, to hone your critical thinking skills so that you can better discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly, and then to increase happiness and decrease harm with that really clear picture of the world, and those honed critical thinking skills. And then lastly is an eagerness to give and receive love, which I would argue is sort of brings us to our higher self. So that said, those are the 5 intentions of the Free Thinker Institute, which are our kind of common values. And for me, that's the number 3 in the middle there is what we're talking about tonight, but it's all in service of trying to make better decisions, which the 5 intentions are intended to help people do. So self-knowledge, I think, is a key part of critical thinking, because if you can't have a solid foundation for your knowledge and wisdom, then building a house on sand is not a good idea, right? It's going to fall over. And so you need to have knowledge of yourself to know your own biases and to know your own sort of what makes you tick, right? And a lot of people go through life without really evaluating their own even like thinking about life goals and thinking about what type of personality type do they have, and a lot of other things that is self-knowledge that we talk about in the Freethinker Institute membership. And I would argue that a core basis of critical thinking is to know one's own biases and where one is coming from in life, so that you know what to be aware of. Confirmation bias is when we only look for evidence that we're right rather than look for evidence of new truths. And everybody has confirmation bias. It's just a psychological phenomena. And without self-knowledge, it's hard to be as self-aware to realize when we are mired in confirmation bias. So being aware that we all have confirmation bias and actively seeking to combat it, and knowing our own perspective, because remember, I was saying we have to know that other sources of information are true. We also have to know that we are being honest with ourselves about what we're experiencing, what we're seeing, and that we're using our ability to reason to seek truth, because that self-knowledge really helps us in that. So I think that's a core part of critical thinking. Now, a lot of people in society don't think critically, and that's not a criticism on those people. Like, I think we have a lot of good reasons for not thinking critically, and so I'm going to go through a bunch of them. One is our education system teaches us to be followers, right? Our education system was created to create factory workers around the turn of the 20th century, when factories were big, and really the education system was meant to churn out factory workers that were order takers, not leaders. And corporations often, are looking for order takers as well. There are a small handful of people that are considered leaders, but we're not really, most organizations are not teaching everyone to be a leader. And so, we are in society, both through our education system and our companies, are often taught to be followers, and that's the behavior that's rewarded. There are also a lot of dogmatic perspectives on life that teach blind faith rather than using reason. And I'm not against faith. Like, I think faith can be very helpful in many ways, but I also think that it's wise to use reason. And I think that a lot of us are taught as children to follow blindly to our parents, and a lot of parents say, do this, right? And then when the child says, well, why do I have to do that? The answer is, because I'm your parent, right? And to me, I've never given that answer to my kids. I always give them a reason for doing everything that I ask them to do, because I don't think me being an authority as their parent is the right reason. Like, I have to have a better reason than that in order to feel like I can tell my kids that they need to do something. There's always a good reason for what I'm asking them to do, so I give it to them, right? And so, but I think that a lot of parents were brought up that way, where they were told, do what I say because I'm the parent and I'm the authority. And so we're all kind of naturally geared in this sort of followership perspective. And I would argue that's a part of why fake news travels faster than real news, because people aren't thinking enough for themselves and questioning things enough. Although I would argue that even blind faith actually requires the person who believes in blind faith to choose, using their own judgment, to have blind faith in whatever they have blind faith in, right? Because they ultimately are exposed to other things, right? And they ultimately have to say, I'm going to keep my blind faith in whatever religion or philosophy. Some people have blind faith in science. I have an essay on determinism, which makes, I think, a pretty good argument that determinism is essentially blind faith in science at the same level that medieval man had in God. And so, even scientists have blind faith. They just have blind faith in the laws of physics, if they're determinists, being the sole determiner of the future. But anyway, I'm digressing on free will. Sorry, I do that. Free will is one of my favorite topics. So we can, and I would argue, we should always apply our judgment to everything we should learn, even if you have blind faith in that the Bible is the word of God, and that everything that it says is true. I don't think we should necessarily trust blindly that our religious teachers are the right interpreters of the Bible, because if you look at the Inquisition, the religious leaders at the time said that torturing people was the right way to save their souls. I think now, historically, we would recognize that was not the right way to save people's souls. But at the time, the religious followers just followed the church leaders blindly. I would argue if all of them had said, you know what, it doesn't feel right to torture people. And I would argue they knew that. Like, I think we all inherently know what's fair and what's unfair, at least in the extremes. And if more people had followed their own judgment and used their own critical thinking skills back in those days, there may never have been torture in the Inquisition, because everyone would have said, no, it doesn't make sense to torture these people. And so I would argue that even if you have blind faith that the Bible is the word of God, or that the Quran is the word of God, or that the Bhagavad Gita is the word of God, whatever your religious book is, or whether you believe in science as the word of God, I would argue it always makes sense to apply your own judgment and critical thinking skills on everything you learn, both knowledge and wisdom, because you ultimately are the captain of your own ship. And as the captain of your own ship, you have to be able to be at peace with the decisions you make. And, you're going to, reap what you sow. And I would argue that, there are different ways that different religions talk about this, and, as karma, or you reap what you sow, or, all kinds of things, but you get what you put out, you get back what you put out. And I would argue that we ultimately all, if we're not aligned with reality, if we're not using our critical thinking skills well, then we're going to end up suffering for it ourselves. So we ultimately need to trust our own critical thinking skills. But to do that, we have to hone our critical thinking skills. And so that's what this series of events is going to be about. And we're going to be doing them over, probably the remainder of the year, quite frankly, and maybe even beyond, because it's a super important topic, probably one of the most important ones, if not the most important one, of the FTI. And so I'm really excited that we have two people that can help us in that effort that we met tonight. So I hope you'll both reach out to me about that. Another thing, scientific dogma I touched on quickly is, but I'm going to go into a little more detail. Science will often say something is absolutely true, and science doesn't teach things with a degree of certainty. And for example, if we said that, I think a more accurate perspective on the origins of the universe is, we think that time began at the singularity, but we still haven't figured out how that came about and what existed before it. And so there's some chance that we may be wrong about that. I think an honest depiction of the origins of the universe would be stated as that. But that's not how scientists state it. They say the universe began, time began at the beginning of the Big Bang, and nothing existed before, but they can't logically explain how something came from nothing at the beginning of the Big Bang, without entering God, and scientists don't believe in God generally. So that's not going to be their answer. But if you read the arguments for this, which I highly encourage everyone to do, there are a lot of hand-waving arguments that don't make a lot of logical sense. And again, trust your own judgment. And again, I have an alternative hypothesis, so I do have a little bit of a quandary with that particular point. But I would just say that in general, science likes to come up with definitive answers without acknowledging where the hypothesis is strong and weak. And so there can be dogma in science as well. Now, science is great at, when there's really clear evidence that's incontrovertible, that refutes the prior stuff, science will adapt and change. And that's one of the things I love about it. I'm a trained scientist, I'm a computer scientist, but science, there's a good book, and I'm forgetting the name on it. My father introduced me to it, and it talks about how major paradigms in science only get revolutionized one generation at a time, because the people who were the founders of it and the big believers of it have to die off in order for a new crop of people to come in and sort of say, we're open to something new. And so even science has its dogma. And so I would just argue that through all walks of life, religion, science, spirituality, whatever you want to believe, learn to hone your critical thinking skills and learn to come to your own conclusions, and learn to be really good at discerning fact from fiction and wisdom from folly, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so another thing is social pressure. Like when someone disagrees with the norms, like probably a lot of you are thinking I'm crazy for questioning that time started at the Big Bang right now, right? Like I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you are, because that's generally considered an accepted norm. But that's why I say do your own research and look at what they say came before the Big Bang and see if it makes sense that time could have not existed in those paradigms. To me, it doesn't make sense. But there's a lot of social negativity for anyone who stands out from the norm. And so I think there's a lot of social pressure to have people fall in line. There was a very interesting experiment I sat in on as an alum, Cornell Psych 101 class. There was an experiment done where 7 people looked at lines on a piece of paper. There were 7 lines on a piece of paper. And the first person, and they were asked, like, are all these lines like aligned? Like, do they all, start and end at the same point? And person number 1 said yes, and person number 2 said yes, and it went all the way through to person number 7. They all said yes. Well, it turns out the lines were not at all aligned, and they were very obviously not aligned. And the first 6 people were all part of the experiment. But the 7th person didn't feel comfortable disagreeing with the other 6 who just agreed that all the lines were in line. And so they just said that they were aligned because they didn't want to seem different. And that shows you the power of peer pressure and how people are so afraid to stand out from the norm. This isn't someone knew they were in a scientific experiment and still didn't feel comfortable speaking their mind in that kind of situation, which tells you how strong peer pressure is for people to fall in line with the people around them. And that's why I'm, very concerned about the amount of echo chambers that go on in the US, especially with fake news traveling faster than real news, because if people surround themselves with people who have the same misunderstanding, then other people who may not even have that misunderstanding will fall in line. And so I think it's really important that we be resilient to that and improve our critical thinking skills. So another view is that I think critical thinking skills help us create models of the world to predict future possibilities. And, this is like, if you take an example of, physics, right? Like Newtonian physics was a model of the world that was very useful and helped us in a lot of areas. But then with Einstein, we came up with a more advanced set of laws of physics that created a better model for the world. If you're a business owner, you may have a model for the world for how your business will function in the world. Well, coming up with good critical thinking skills enables us to create a model for how the world will work and how things will work in the world. And so I would argue that's another sort of thing that critical thinking skills enables us to do, is to create predictive models, if you will. And I don't mean just mathematically predictive models, but just being able to anticipate what someone's going to say and do is a predictive model in some regards. And so if you get to know some people really well and you know what they would do in a situation, that's a predictive model. And now, because of your relationship with that person, you have a good predictive model with that person. And so those things are what critical thinking skills, I think, enable us to do. Now, another aspect of critical thinking skills is formal logic. This is something that I only learned about when I was an exchange student in Spain, because the US doesn't teach any formal logic, and I think it's a shame, like we should be. And so we will have a class on formal logic at some point in the Freethinker Institute, which I encourage you all to come to. And an example of formal logic is if I say, if all raspberries are red and I'm holding a raspberry, then what I'm holding is red. Seems pretty logical, right? Except here's the thing, not all raspberries are red. An unripe raspberry is still green, or it might even be a different color. And so the fact is, formal logic holds with it a lot of power for reasoning and creating conclusions from a series of assumptions. But you need to know that your assumptions are safe and that you're not committing any what are called logical fallacies. A fallacy is another thing that comes along with formal logic, and we'll do another event on fallacies because both of them probably deserve their own events. And so an example of a fallacy would be, this is an example of a fallacy, is basically unsound reasoning is the common parlance for a fallacy, or the common way of communicating a fallacy. And so an appeal to ignorance means, here's an example of an appeal to ignorance. People have been trying for centuries to prove that God exists, but no one has been able to prove it. Therefore, God does not exist. That's basically saying, because there's no evidence, it's not true. But actually, that's not a logical proof that God doesn't exist. In fact, you can't prove that God doesn't exist. Even if God doesn't exist, you can't prove that unicorns don't exist. It's a logically impossible thing to prove that something doesn't exist. You can say, a unicorn doesn't exist right in front of me on my desk. And so get more specific about that. But and these are the things that, logical fallacies will make someone believe something, even though there's no sound reasoning to come to that conclusion. And so fallacies are very dangerous because they can be used by sort of slippery speakers to make you convinced of something that really isn't true and isn't on solid grounds, but it sounds so convincing, right? It sounds pretty convincing. Yeah, people have been trying so long to prove God exists, but no one's been able to, so he can't exist, right? But that's not actually sound reasoning. Now I'm going to give the ChatGPT view of critical thinking skills, because for those that haven't used ChatGPT, I highly recommend it. It's great. They talk about analysis, which is breaking down complex information into its component parts, the ability to identify patterns, relationships, and connections between different pieces of information. That's what I was talking about around models. I talk about that as creating models for future prediction. Evaluation is to assess credibility, relevance, and reliability to different sources of information and weigh the strengths and weaknesses of different arguments and perspectives. A lot of what I talked about tonight was about that. Inference is the ability to draw logical and reasonable conclusions from available evidence, and to recognize and avoid common errors in reasoning and judgment. Next is interpretation, to make sense of complex data and information and identify key trends, themes, or implications. We did this in the event on global warming. Global warming is one of those things that, I always, a lot of the sources that, that I heard, had good arguments on both sides of global warming. And so I finally, spent the time to sit down and use my critical thinking skills to do the research. And I looked at, the data and made sense of complex information, and then summarized that into a pretty clear argument that, since human history, since Earth's formation, that the fastest that the Earth's temperature has ever increased prior to the last 200 years was 1 degree Fahrenheit in 260,000 years. Well, it turns out that it's gone up 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 200 years. And that made me pretty convinced that global warming seems like a human-inspired thing, because that was a pretty incontrovertible set of data and a way of making sense of complex data and information to spot a key trend or theme by, doing a comparative study of temperature increases over time, based on the arguments that I've heard from both people that were pro and against global warming. To be honest, before we had that event, I had never heard a good counter argument to the group that says that global warming isn't real. Had always said, well, temperature fluctuations are within normal norms of Earth's history. And it turns out that's actually not only true, we're in the coldest 10 to 15% of Earth's history. So yes, global warming is what it was originally called. Now it's called climate change, but we're in the cold side of Earth's history, not the warm side. But we are rising so fast that, within a couple hundred years, we're going to be in dangerous territory if we don't change things. So that was an example of interpretation. And explanation is the ability to communicate complex ideas or concepts clearly and persuasively, which is what I tried to do in that event. You guys that came to it can tell me if I did or not, and I just summarized it so you can tell me if I did here or not. And to support one's argument and with relevant evidence and examples. So this is the ChatGPT view of critical thinking. I think it's a very good one. I think it aligns with everything that I went through, but is a very succinct way of putting it. Maybe a little less prescriptive than I was getting, but AI can't do everything yet. We still have jobs, and there's a lot of benefit from AI. We should have another event on AI. So what happens when we don't get critical thinking right? Well, it results in a misunderstanding about the world if we are misusing critical thinking, or not effectively using critical thinking on knowledge or facts about objective reality. And then the other thing we could misuse critical thinking on is about decisions that we make. And I would argue that decisions that we make should be geared towards increasing happiness and decreasing harm for ourselves and the people we can influence, while keeping clearly aligned with truth, which I would argue is what helps us do that effectively. And so if we're not using critical thinking skills well, we have a misunderstanding about the world, which can create an unsolid foundation for our decision making. And then we end up, either because of a misunderstanding about the world or because of poor decision making processes, make decisions that cause harm and reduce happiness, when really we all know that it would be better to increase happiness than decrease harm. And so that's what happens when we don't get critical thinking right. And that's the last slide. So now I'm about 30 minutes in, and so hands for everyone. So Dave, go ahead.
Thank you, Garrett, and I very much enjoyed your presentation. And I do my thinking a lot of times by parallels, and this is a very dangerous time. I think you start off by saying, and I admire the library in your background. I grew up a couple blocks from a public library, and I love libraries. But the thing of it is now, all the information in all the libraries in the world is in my phone.
Yeah.
It's internet. It's wonderful. But I think then it gets back to what you said in your first slide, facts versus fiction. So to me, the problem is truth. And, you know, as a computer programmer, you can put about anything out there. I can say it's Tuesday according to the New York Times, but where's the certification that it actually came from the New York Times? So the parallel I would like to draw is the introduction of electricity into our homes and appliances. Those of a certain age will remember, but used to be, you'd be afraid, well, if I buy this, maybe I'll get shocked, maybe it'll burn down my home. There was a third-party agency called Underwriters Laboratory that would test appliances. And if they passed their test, it got a little round label, I think yellow and red, around the cord to know that this appliance is approved by Underwriters Laboratory. And I think we need some way, and I think you will agree as a programmer, it'll probably have to be done by some kind of fancy software. First, especially that this is identified as coming as AI. So I'm in another AI discussion group, and it can look, you know, like I want 5 paragraphs, a biography of Thomas Jefferson, and AI will kick it out, but you know, who knows whether it's true or not. But so you need to know if it's AI, but then also you need a third-party agency to certify that truth, you know, where the sources are, that it's not confirmation bias, that kind of stuff. So that's my 2 bits. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I would argue that it doesn't only have to be a third-party agency. It needs to be one that's unbiased and comes from a position where they don't benefit or you know, there's no plus or minus to them lying. Actually, I should say that differently. There should be a big negative to them lying, right? Like anyone in that third party, you know, organization that lies should end up with major consequences. And when there are no consequences to lying and people can get away with lying and serve their own interests, well, we find that lying is actually really common under those circumstances. And unfortunately, a lot of the people who have bullhorns in today's world, which by the way, we all have bullhorns in today's world because of social media. So that's the big upending. And I think the big reason that misinformation travels faster than real news is that everybody has a voice, and there's a great democratization in that, giving everyone a voice that I love. But what it requires is that we all have the critical thinking skills to discern fact from fiction and wisdom from folly. And we haven't been trained in those skills. And so right now we're like a child with a handgun. You know, we have this great, powerful weapon, a huge bullhorn given to everybody in society without us having the skills of knowing how to handle that handgun. And so, not to use guns as an example, because, but, you know, hopefully everyone would agree a toddler shouldn't have a handgun. So I'm agreeing with you, Dave, and just adding my 2 cents. Does that make sense? Cool. Thank you for your comment. Really important one is that, and I think, Dave, like, if I'm channeling you right, the idea of having authorities is valuable. And I agree with you that it's valuable to have authorities, especially objective authorities. And that's what fact checkers are for. But then you get a lot of people saying all the fact checkers are biased. And then it's like, wait a minute, like, you know, like, how can everybody that's trying to be objective be biased? And then you have to question if you're saying something like all the fact checkers are biased, you have to check whether or not it's your confirmation bias saying that, and you would rather just be right than seek truth. And I would argue it should be more important for all of us to seek truth rather than to be right about our confirmation bias, because otherwise we get mired in our confirmation bias. Eleonora, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, I don't know. I'm not even sure if it's worth it to get excited about any information at the moment. sometimes I'm listening to things and I'm thinking why people create this type of information. So for instance, I would hear some news and then I would ask myself, why? What purpose would it have on long term? And then I'm trying to imagine me speaking this information out loud. And then I kind of get this sense of the feel of how the person must feel. Maybe angry or maybe neglected, maybe painful. I think at the moment we have a lot of people who have pain, suffering. And I'm not even sure if one needs to be upset at someone at the moment, because people are just trying to figure out really who they are and where they're standing at. And the most funny thing I experienced is my friend was staying here with me, and she says, oh, she's going to on a ride. And I was like, oh my God, where is this? And she's like, yes, we will go there, we will scratch their eyes and we will fight off. And I'm thinking, like, I don't want this. I don't even want to go anywhere. I don't want to fight anything. But she was so convinced, and I was like, where is this all? Hopefully not at my place, or hopefully like not around me, you know? So people do have own realities, and people live in their own kind of like head. And there's seriously a physical place, obviously, where everyone can go and fight off whatever they want to, you know, for their rights. But may everyone get happy, you know? It's not like it's not my business. So I think it's important to understand why people create this information, and on long term, when more people, when this type of information gets attention of many people, where is it all going?
What was the last sentence you said? Sorry, it sounded like you cut off.
When certain information gets more attention, so where is it all going, basically? Sorry for my bad English. So where is this all going in terms of what consequences it has when more and more people are attending certain information?
Yeah.
So it's called basically movement. Yeah, but movements can be good and movements can be bad. And movements can be useless, movements can be useful, you know.
I agree with you completely. And I would argue that when you see your friends that are angry about that, I would urge everyone to, when you're angry at someone, you know, go to that person and ask them why they believe whatever it is that you're angry about, and do what we call listening to understand, rather than getting angry at them and clawing at their eyes. Say, so why do you think that, right? Just be inquisitive.
It doesn't matter. I've been in so many different, let's say, sites or groups,
yep.
People who believe in different things. And I need to say, everyone is angry. You know, if I go group A, they want to scratch someone. If I go to group B and I'm in this moment sitting there and they want to scratch someone, and then I go to group C and they're also angry, I was like, oh my God, everyone is so angry.
Right. Everyone is angry, and it's the left angry at the right and the right angry at the left, and the middle gets caught in the middle, and you know, I'm in the middle and the left is angry at me and the right is angry at me. So everyone's angry at me. So I get it. But what I would encourage is, instead of being angry at people, ask them why they think what they think. Do what we call listening to understand, empathize with them, and try to understand where they're coming from with authenticity. Like, really try to get into their heads.
I don't want to listen to anyone anymore. I'm tired.
Well, you may not have the energy, Eleonora, but when you get the energy, I would encourage you to listen to them and understand where they're coming from. And if nothing else, encourage your friends who are angry to do that instead of being angry. Because being angry...
No, I actually fired everyone, you know, so I cleaned everything out around myself. I need new friends. Please feel welcome to be my friends.
Well, I'm happy to be your friend. And if you join the Free Thinker Institute, that's part of what I was going to mention to you, is that we're all about helping people figure out who they are and creating, meaningful friendships that of people who want to seek truth and to be the best version of ourselves and to be fair. And if that sounds like a likable group of people, then cool. Like reach out. Ellis is going to post information. I think she just did actually about membership of the FTI, and we would love for you to apply for membership and make new friends that are more interested in seeking truth rather than being right, which a lot of the people that are angry, they just want to be right, and they want to be right about being angry. And that's not going to help anyone, right? What's going to help everyone is empathizing with other people, listening to understand, and asking them thoughtful questions so that you can either understand where they're coming from or help them realize that they don't have good answers to the questions you're asking. And then they're going to come to the conclusion that they're wrong themselves. And that's how Daryl Davis is the Black jazz musician that convinced hundreds of KKK members to no longer be racist. He just asked them thoughtful questions that helped them realize they didn't have a good reason to be racist. And when they came to the conclusion that they didn't have a good reason, they changed their minds. And so listening and asking questions is way more powerful than telling someone they're wrong. Telling someone they're wrong puts them on the defensive and makes you the enemy. Whereas asking them empathetic questions, is a much better approach, in my opinion. So sorry to hear you had to fire all your friends, Eleanor, but you're not the only person I've heard say that, by the way. And there's a dearth of friendships in this country. And that's part of why we have FTI membership, is to create more friendships in this country, but meaningful friendships, with people with common values. Mike, did you want to, I'm not sure if you were partying or if you wanted to make a comment on that, but you're next anyway. So why don't I just let you speak?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Hi, my name is Mike, and I'm a software engineer working in Manhattan. And I can tell you why everybody's angry today, because things have turned into team sports. It's not left or right anymore. It's my team against your team. I'm going to support them no matter what they do, which is, I've been trying to highlight to people around me lately that, you know what, forget these people, look out for yourself and what is good for your community and your family and all that. And like, for example, support the people that would help you in that aspect. Don't just, go ahead and vote this or that or the other just because you always done that. And if you follow, the anger is the same as the anger in the sports arena, right?
Yeah.
And people end up fighting, like, in the UK with the soccer or whatever. So the other thing I wanted to highlight is that the medium now has become the message, and people have become too lazy to go find out the truth for themselves. I've been telling people, go Google it, go Google it and read from multiple sources if it's true or not. But people hear it on this channel or the other channel or whatever news network they listen to, and just because they listen to it all their life, they take it as a fact. And I learned actually not to do that. So I keep flipping the channels to trying to find out together. And I don't have time to do all that. So I actually stopped listening to news. I also disconnected a little bit.
Yeah. No, I have
Okay,
disconnected from the news. I still get it through friends and social media, and I see news, but I consciously don't spend a lot of time on the news, mostly because the news is very alarmist. That's, they're there to sell eyeballs. They're not there to tell the news anymore. I don't know what to say other than I just don't think that the news is there to inform objectively the way that it used to be. I don't find that it always talks about the most meaningful things going on in the world. But I hear you about that it's turned into a team sport, and that's what I'm trying to help combat against. That's part of why I started the Freethinker Institute, is to, help us all realize we're on the same team. We may have different beliefs, but ultimately we have more in common with each other than we have to disagree about. We can vote for different people for different reasons, and that's fine. And we can have different opinions about pro-life or pro-choice, although we had an event on abortion as well, which I would argue that there's common ground to be found in that debate, even though that you might think there's not. But I would argue that you're right that it has turned into a team sport and an us versus them and a blind followership. And that's why critical thinking is so important, is that we can't give into our emotions, right? When we give into our emotions, we make bad decisions. And when we get angry at the others, as being the wrong people and the enemy and the bad people. We're all human beings, and we all have more in common as human beings than we have separating us. And I think it's important to remember that.
I think Abe wanted to jump in.
Please, thank you. Keep an eye out on that, Ellis. So keep doing that for me, because I can't see it all the time.
I mean, don't you think we are going to a group think mentality? I mean, a good example would be, I'm from the Northeast and I went to Texas last week. My views were completely different from what the people whom I met in Texas. Like in terms of, guns. I mean, when I look at guns, I don't see so much of shooting in the Northeast. But when you go south, they think it's their right. They talk about Second Amendment. They talk about Jesus and, things about, anti-abortion views. And from my perspective, I look at them as, I've got this bias also. I know where they come from. And it's very difficult for me to accept it.
What part is difficult for you to accept? You mean help me understand that.
It's difficult for me to accept, it's like, it's a simple thing. I mean, when you have all these guns and shooting every day, I mean, something has to be done about it.
Oh, you mean the guns part is difficult for you to accept, like having people be able to have access to guns, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and we have become a laughing stock around the world. And,
yeah,
and you find people still talking about having these AK-15s, which they use in a war. And
right.
We don't need it. And it's difficult to convince them that, you don't need those type of guns.
Right.
And what I find is like a groupthink mentality. I just think, why is it that they don't understand?
See, that I think that is part of the groupthink mentality, is why don't they understand? They would also argue, why don't you understand, right, Abe? Why don't you understand that we're hunters and we need these guns to go hunting? And I'm not claiming that I can understand why they think they need a semi-automatic or rifle that needs to be turned into an automatic rifle by mail order, because that's a little bit harder to understand. Although if you look at and you try to channel, I guess I will, maybe I do have an answer to that. If you try to channel our founding fathers and why there was a right to bear arms, it was to have a militia, so that if there was, I would argue that a significant reason was so that if there was ever a tyrannical government, that the militias, the state militias could overturn a central government that was authoritarian. And so the idea of a right to bear arms is sort of about being able to defend freedom and democracy. And so there's a good argument to be made for that. And it's a nuanced subject that's not, I don't think we should just simply say the gun owners are wrong. I don't think it's that simple. There should be no guns and we should ban guns in America, I don't think is the answer. And we actually had a topic, like an event on this topic another night earlier this year. And it's a complicated subject that I think needs to be handled with finesse, especially considering how strongly a lot of Americans believe in their guns. And many of them will tell you can take it out of my cold, dead hands. And you're not going to convince someone who says something like that by telling them they're wrong. We're going to, if we're going to convince them of anything, it's going to be by listening to them to understand their perspective better. And I did my best to channel it. Although if there are gun owners here that are strong advocates and felt like I got it wrong, feel free to correct me and speak your mind. Mike, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, sir. I'm talking a bit too much tonight.
Okay, that's
I'm actually a gun owner myself.
There you go.
And I'm a very peaceful guy. I don't even want to hunt animals because I think I just can't accept it. You have a right to kill another living thing. But I do have guns because I like the idea of them. I go to my range and use them, and everything is fine. What I find alarming is that these shootings come in waves, and I'm not sure what causes people randomly around. And they don't just happen in the US, they happen in Canada, they happen in New Zealand, they happen everywhere. And I don't look at the tool that they use to kill other people because they use all kinds of tools. But I'm trying to understand, but I can't figure it out why these happen in waves. And I have to link it to unhappiness, maybe in the population. I have no idea really. But the media has become inflammatory, including the media company I work for. When you listen to some reporting, it's always the language they use to almost be designed to inflame the other side.
Yeah.
Oh, look at these politicians. They passed this. They want to kill, babies or grandmas or things like that, right? And that inflames the other side that believes in this particular media source. So, yeah, I understand, and I hear about a shooting, and I say, who goes around shooting people? I mean, why? Why would you do that?
Right.
I don't understand that. I hope someone can explain it to me. But it's not the guns, because if they don't have them, they're gonna have a truck, they're gonna have a knife, they're gonna have a bomb or whatever. Right?
And that's why I think that attacking guns is the wrong way to attack it, which is what we talked about on our event on guns. And I don't want to digress too much on it. I want to sort of try to answer your question as best I can, Mike, from our conversation that night. But I would argue that there's a dearth of friendships. And so there are a lot of lonely people in this country and world, quite frankly. And there's a lot of untreated mental health problems, people who are, lonely, miserable, bullied, and if I've read about a number of these people who committed school shootings, and this is the situation, it was their colleagues and coworkers made fun of them day after day, their fellow students made fun of them day after day, and they had no outlet, and they didn't get proper treatment and help to deal with the situation they were dealing with. And eventually they snapped and said, I'm just going to kill as many people as I can. And that has been the ones that I researched in detail. That's been the story. And so when I presented on guns, I said, for me, what we should be doing is focusing on mental health help and getting the mental health help that people need, so that we don't have people who are miserable and unhappy and so angry that they just want to kill people as a way of venting for their own misery. And so again, I don't want to digress on gun ownership specifically, but to say that I think that empathizing with people is a better approach to being angry at people. Don't be angry at gun owners. Try to understand where they're coming from, and try to look for a different root cause than maybe the one that the media is telling us is the issue. The media sells eyeballs by getting us addicted to watching the media, and that's how they make money, right? And unfortunately, doing that, getting people emotional, is going to get people coming back and watching every day, because people get addicted to that kind of emotional response. And that's why our only rule is to remain polite, because it keeps us calm, cool, and collected and thinking more reasonably rather than getting emotional. And people have gotten emotional in these events, but we usually try to calm them down, and usually they manage. So that said, thank you, Mike, for your comments. Really appreciate it. You weren't the gun owner I was hoping for, but it's okay. You're a gun owner. It was a start. So I was hoping for the one that said we need an AR-17. And if we have any of those, I would welcome you to raise your hand and tell me if I was wrong about my channeling the perspective. So, Will, go ahead. I don't think you're the gun owner with the automatic rifle.
For me.
Go ahead, Will.
Oh yeah, no, I don't have a rifle.
Didn't think so, Will.
Just handguns. Anyway, Garrett, what I was going to say was that when you were speaking, I don't want to digress too much. I only put my hand up because there was nobody else.
It's okay.
Had their hand up, so I don't want to digress. But when you were speaking about the inception of time, I'm not sure if you were defending the current theory or casting doubt on it.
I was trying to cast a little bit of doubt in saying that in order for time to begin, there had to be a first moment in time. But in order for there to be a first moment in time, how did that first moment in time even come about? And that's what I don't think science has come up with a good explanation for how the first moment in time came about. And I'm okay with that, by the way. I would just say that what scientists generally don't do is they don't go, we have a good explanation for everything starting from the Big Bang going forward. We don't really have a great explanation for how that first moment in time came about. So if someone's got a better theory there, we're all ears, right? Like scientists don't give those caveats. they give definitive answers, and they try to give definitive answers even when sometimes they don't make any sense, because we all naturally want to have an answer. And I would caution everybody that when you don't have an answer, it's okay to not have an answer. It's okay to say, I don't know, and then to inquire and to try to learn more. And so I would argue that science falls prey to not acknowledging what it doesn't know, and, as well as religion. And, both like religion, science, spirituality, all paradigms do that. And all I would say is part of critical thinking is acknowledging how confident we are in something and being able to acknowledge what we don't know and being honest about it and being open to new truths that will teach us more about those things.
Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, well, what I was going to say anyway was that irrespective of, whether you were defending it or casting doubt on it, it is an example of how vehemently scientists defend their theories, and which is demonstrative of this element of human nature, I think, where we do it in all aspects, whether it's the New York Yankees are better than the Boston Red Sox, a Ford's better than a Toyota. We vehemently defend our scaffolding of the world, and it is at the detriment of critical thinking. And I've had a huge argument with a friend of mine where we nearly sort of wouldn't speak anymore because I was saying we'll never be able to figure it out. I've probably had that discussion with you to some degree. I think it's beyond human comprehension. And then other people start jumping up and down and saying, no, it's not. But it's an example of even scientists really do become dogmatic, that we can work everything out.
Right.
And I think it's really fascinating, that aspect of human nature. It's like our ego somehow is entwined in reasoning to such a degree that we will forego critical thinking for the sake of defending our scaffolding, as a friend put it to me recently. We've all got this scaffolding, we've got a sort of an existential angst, and we defend our view of the world by keeping our scaffolding well buttressed. And God forbid anybody take out one of our planks of reasoning. But this is where I don't want to digress, I've come up with a new theory about the Big Bang, and that now may not be the time to quickly share it, but it'll take about 30 seconds if you're ready.
Go ahead, share it.
Thank you. Well, Neil deGrasse Tyson, this isn't on the subject of critical thinking, although it could be perhaps incorporated into the discussion, I'm not sure, but Neil deGrasse Tyson was recently asked what keeps him awake at night, things about physics and the universe. I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't know everything anyway. He's just like a pop physicist that brings it to the masses. He's not necessarily particularly creative or a genius. However, he said that the thing that keeps him awake is that the known universe, which is 70 billion light years wide, which we can observe through like the James Webb Deep Space Telescope and the Hubble telescope before that, may not be so if you think of that like a bubble, like say a giant ball, we can see that 70 billion light years wide with trillions of galaxies in it. But there could be other of those spheres with galaxies in them that we'll never see because everything's expanded so much. Now, if you take that aspect, that there are things we cannot see in the celestial sphere, and you combine that with what the common theory now is relating to this thing with the emergence of time, that something emerged from pure, utter, pristine nothingness, or alternatively, it existed infinitely without first cause. If pressed on the issue, most physicists will say it's more reasonable to assume that energy existed infinitely without first cause. So what I'm saying is, if the Big Bang that caused our known universe to be 70 billion light years wide was not a single isolated event, as per Neil deGrasse Tyson saying there could be other spheres out there which we can't see with trillions of galaxies in them, and if perhaps so energy existed infinitely without first cause, our Big Bang is not local, isolated, independent event. Therefore, if energy existed infinitely prior to this moment in so-called time, then I propose that Big Bangs may have occurred infinitely, regressively before now. There may have been infinite Big Bangs, and therefore there are infinite other spheres of universes with the same physical properties as our universe has. However, there's just infinite amounts of them. And my final point, I've said I'll keep it into 30 seconds, sorry about that. Final point is, therefore, but like as for extraterrestrial beings, they say if there was an extraterrestrial being in our known universe, it could only be 13 billion years old, because that's how long since the Big Bang. However, if there have been infinite Big Bangs, there could be infinite time for civilizations to have emerged. So there may be civilizations which are in fact 1 trillion years old, or as you know, infinitely old. So there's a lot of things there. Sorry to ramble on, but I'm just kind of glad I got that off my chest. And I don't, as I said, it's somewhat of a
come to my. I thought you were at my event on the origins of the universe, because I presented exactly that theory there.
What, with the infinite Big Bangs?
Yeah.
Wow, was I at that?
I don't know if you. I guess you weren't there. Or you. I mean, maybe you were there. I don't
know. I don't. To be honest, I don't listen much to. I'm usually doing something in the background. I don't even know what meetings I'm at half the time.
Well, maybe you learned about it like subliminally. But yeah, that's exactly my essay that I wrote.
Did you copyright? Is that your intellectual property, Garrett? I'm going to quickly register it. Where do we go?
I came up with it in 2017, my friend.
So no, I think
I have a number on it before Neil deGrasse Tyson, as far as I know. So
yeah, no, well, I thought of that about 4 days ago or the week before last. Yeah, when I saw Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about the bubbles. Anyway, it's interesting stuff. And it's fascinating.
It is interesting, fascinating, and I would argue it's a more honest and hopeful view of the universe. So I'm glad to hear you saying it, because I want more people to say it, because I think it's a realistic view of the universe, and it's one that's actually much more hopeful than what scientists give us, which is heat death or big crunch, where humanity eventually ends no matter what we do, and we're all fated to die. We're all going to die, right? Well, actually, it turns out if we're right, you know, we can actually dance along the edges of universes infinitely, and, you know, be, you know, elevated beings at some point that are capable of a whole heck of a lot more than we are now as our modern ape current form. So that said, Ginny, why don't you go next? Thanks, Will, for sharing that. I'm sorry, did you want to say something else, Will?
Well, just it gives extra weight to this thing of perhaps we've been created by something else, which I don't actually believe. If I had to bet the farm on it, I would say no. But it does give more weight to that theory that perhaps we've been created by something that's like 100,000 billion years old, not just 13 billion years old.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say I have a pretty good logical argument that our free will itself comes from a higher power, because how else can non-deterministic free will come about other than from something that has non-deterministic free will? And so I would argue that you're right, indirectly, not that life as we know it came about from that, but that free will came about from that. But that's another story, and we're digressing from critical thinking skills, but would love to chat with you about it in the online community if you want, Will. Ginny, why don't you go ahead if we can get back to critical thinking skills. Sorry, we digress a little. You can go off on a tangent too if you want.
Well, I may be going off slightly on the tangent, but you said earlier.
Here, so it's okay.
We are all friends here. So Garrett, you said earlier, I believe, that most scientists think whatever discoveries they've made, they think is a definitive answer to whatever they've been.
Whether they think it that way or not, they generally present it as definitive truth.
Yeah. And I've been saying for years and years and years, nothing is definitive when it comes to science. So yeah, that's all I want to say.
I love it, Ginny. And I think that I think it was Socrates said, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. And he didn't mean that he knows nothing, right? Like we hopefully all realize Socrates was probably one of the smartest men alive, if not the smartest man alive. He didn't mean that he knew nothing. He meant he always has an open mind that he might be wrong about what he currently believes. And that's why he had the smartest mind of his time because he was always open to being wrong, and he was always learning by asking thoughtful questions of other people. And you learn way more by asking thoughtful questions of other people than you do by restating your current beliefs. And so, you know, the only thing I know is that I know nothing is basically a healthy argument for skepticism of everything that we currently believe, and always being open to new truths, which is part of the second intention, which is open-mindedness. So, you know, I'm with you, Jenny. Like, I think,
Yeah, and that's what philosophers are supposed to do, right? And we are here for philosophizing, and we're philosophers.
yeah,
And
we're
you know,
hopefully-
but when it comes, an example, for example, that I keep thinking of when it comes to science, definitive science, you know, for the longest time, they kept saying cholesterol bad for you, cholesterol, cholesterol, cholesterol. Well, come to find out, it's a sugar that is a killer. Oh, I actually, I made this comment the last week too, Garrett, and I think you actually said, oh, I do like sweets.
I do, and I eat too much sugar, and you know, don't tell my dad that I eat so much sugar. He already knows, because he's very into health and keeps telling me eat less sugar. And it is like, you know, it is unhealthy. And you're right that sugar is a very unhealthy thing. And there are certain sugars that are more unhealthy than others. I forget the one that's in like Coca-Cola, not to, you know, but like all like major soft drinks have the same sugar in it. And if someone knows it, just raise your hand. And what is it?
Corn syrup.
No, it's not corn syrup. It's fructose.
Fructose, yeah.
Yeah, it is corn syrup, but it's fructose is the specific sugar that's really, really harmful for you. So highly recommend everybody avoid fructose like the plague. If you look up the health impacts of fructose, it's really bad, much worse than typical sugar. But yeah, sugar had a really good lobby. And
But
so
is there fructose in cereal, like you know, children's cereal?
You have to look it up,
Frosted
but if you
Flakes?
look at the ingredients, it has to be on there. So if it doesn't say fructose, then I don't think it's in cereal. I think it's like a liquid thing, but I could be wrong.
Okay, all right, I diverged. Sorry about that.
No worries. Stephen, how are you? Good to see you. You're still on mute. No worries, glasses.
Yeah.
There we go. Now we can hear.
Yeah, and on the same, I thought that was an excellent example where a scientific paradigm is defended as a dogma until people realize that maybe they were wrong. Because further research, I think there was a Senate committee found that there were a number of harmful things in the diet that were causing cholesterol, and one, especially sugar, possibly cholesterol. But the sugar lobby, as you said, you know, created this dogma, and then the medical community just kept spreading the pyramid. And now there's a much more nuanced understanding. The same thing happened. There was a U.S. Senator, Harry Reid from Nevada. He was retiring, but he put a clause in the defense budget. You must tell us what you know about the flying saucers, because my constituents, regardless of what the scientific community says, and regardless of what the Defense Department says, we keep seeing these things. We keep seeing the lights. So did John Lennon. So did many, many individuals. So did President Carter. People say there's something out there, and we don't know what it is. Please tell us at least what you know. But the dogma was, if you say there's a UFO, you're crazy.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I'm sorry.
Can I finish?
Go ahead, finish.
And then you go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't.
What happened was that the report finally came out, and they said, well, it turns out lots of very credible, very experienced, very respected pilots, fighter pilots, commercial pilots, observers on the ground. We saw things, and then about 98% we could explain. Yes, they were balloons or something else. But then that 2%, there's a lot, and a lot of them we can't explain what they are. And in fact, it's better. This is like Socratic reasoning. I don't know what I don't know is wisdom. Yeah. And it turns out they don't know, and they admit that they don't know. And all they did was, being military, they gave it a new acronym. It's not UFOs anymore. It's unidentified aerial phenomenon, or a UAP. So people could now look up and say, God damn, there's a UAP out there. Let's go tell the newspapers. So we're actually in a better place of wisdom, but people are not freaking out because we don't know what it is. It's a mystery, and mysteries are fun. Mysteries are interesting. But I'll say this one thing, which we could say philosophically, which is, if something is watching you, everyone should be on their best behavior.
I appreciate that
Being
comment.
observed, be on good behavior.
I agree with you completely. And that's why I argue not only for same life karma, which is almost incontrovertible, but for metaphysical karma, I have a good logical argument for it as well. And actually the research showing that reincarnation is almost certainly true makes a pretty good argument. Like, if reincarnation is true, well, it's hard to imagine that there's not some process for, you know, how does the soul get reincarnated? And it's hard to imagine that anything responsible for that would not be like rewarding people who do good in this life, and, you know, not punishing, but sort of reducing the influence, is the way that I like to put it, anyone that does bad things in this life, so that you can't cause as much harm in the next life. And the other thing, I think your point about UFOs was great. Like, I had not heard of that new name for UFOs. But the argument that I made, and I forget when I wrote this essay, but was on, let me see if, no, I can't find it. So, but basically the idea is the universe is unfathomably large. To think that we are the absolutely only sentient life in the entire known universe means that we are this one point in like trillions upon trillions of like huge amounts of galaxies and planets, and, you know, of just immense, like, what's the chance that we are the only single instance of any life? And if we're not the only single instance, then there's got to be other life in the known universe. And if there's other life, to think that we are the highest life seems unfathomable too. Like, are we literally the epitome of all life that could have possibly existed since the beginning of the Big Bang? And if Neil deGrasse Tyson and me and Will are all right, the universe is actually infinitely old and has always existed. And therefore, there's actually probably infinite types of life in the universe, not just us, but infinite types of life in the universe, because there are infinite opportunities for life. And infinity is hard to get your mind around, but you know, I would argue that's more likely the reality than that people are crazy for believing in UFOs. I think you have to be crazy to not believe in UFOs. Although I don't know if, like, you know, the US government actually released films of UFOs that, you know, I watched one of those videos and I was like, oh yeah, like, if the government is releasing this and can't explain it themselves, and these are like, you know, fighter jet pilots that are flying about as fast as things that we know can fly, and they're saying that that thing flew like, you know, 50 times faster than anything that they've ever seen, that's a little hard to fathom. So maybe these things are flying around. I used to say, I don't know if they're flying around, but once I saw that video, I was like, oh, maybe they are flying around. But I don't know if UFOs fly around in spaceships or what. But anyway, to think that there's no other life in the universe seems a little bit unfathomable to me. So, Will, thank you, Stephen, for your comments. Good to see you.
Thanks, Garrett. Maybe we could have a UFO night one day.
We should. Like,
yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
I just want
to list.
I was just introducing Daniel because he's having trouble putting his hand up, he said in the chat. So, but yeah, and I'll just say there are 1 trillion planets just in the Milky Way alone. They've estimated 1 trillion planets in our galaxy. Yeah.
Thank you. I gave the numbers a little bit off, but I was estimating. So,
well, there's 200 billion stars, so if they've each got an average of 3 planets, there's 600 billion. If they've each got 10 planets like our solar system has, there's 2 trillion right there. So if we go with 5, there's 1 trillion right there. Poor old Daniel's having a hard time getting to speak.
Is Daniel have his hand up?
Yeah, Daniel
He
wants to go next.
He can't get the hand up. So he's
Oh, I'm
just
sorry, Daniel. Go ahead. You're we can't hear you though. You're not on mute, but we can't hear you. Try connecting to audio.
He's disappeared altogether, has he? No, there he is.
He went off video, but hopefully I think he's working on the audio. So
There we go. Are you able to hear me now?
you can go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I appreciate your guys' patience. So the only reason why I turned off my video at this point is that I've gotten comments before that when I leave my video on, for some reason, I begin to lag pretty often. So there are moments where like all of a sudden I'll just freeze up or pause. So that's the reason why I have my video off right now. I'll try and be brief, and I guess I'm going to kind of approach this from a rather cynical point of view. So forgive me for that. And I only love the opportunity to outline my thoughts a little more clearly. But so essentially, I'm reminded of a quote by Nietzsche when he says something to the effect of, "We say it is explanation, but it is only in description that we are in advance of the older stages of knowledge and science. We describe better, we explain just as little as our predecessors." And what that sort of means for me, I guess, my major takeaway from that is that in some way, I'm rather deeply skeptical about claims to knowledge or claims to enlightenment and wisdom and things of that sort. I value all those things deeply. I should put that out there right now. And we've already mentioned a few figures that have tremendously influenced my own thoughts and feelings and life. In fact, Socrates, when I was introduced to philosophy and Plato and Socrates specifically, when I was about 17, that propelled my life in a direction completely differently than the one that I was expecting to go to. I had changed my life overnight. Well, and so anyway, so back to this. So I guess kind of where, like, so in part, why do I think that and how does it relate to critical thinking is, so I think it's important to reference or to bring back the points that we've already made, which is that we are fallacious or biased creatures. I think bias might be more accurate here. And I don't think that that's an accident. I don't think necessarily that we are making these, that we have these biases as a kind of cognitive mistake, if you want to refer to it in that way. Instead, I'd argue that we have biases because we need to. I think we have biases because that's in some way the way that we're biologically constituted. So for example, I don't know what the name of this phenomenon is, but there's this image you can see where there will be two objects, say two squares, and they're going to be two different colors, gray and white, if I'm not mistaken. And then you'll put in, and then what you'll do is imagine if you have two vertical lines next to one another, and one line is colored from white at the top, and then it goes gray at the bottom. And then you have a small square on the left-hand side of this line, and you start that square at the top. It will look similar to the top color, which would be white. And as you move that square down, it will look more similar to the gray coloration as you go down the sort of the bar, if you will. I'm not explaining that very well, but what that kind of means in part is that we're not actually, the color of the square is the same thing as the rest of the image on the right-hand side. It's all the same color, but the way we perceive the object is differently depending on the surrounding objects that it's by. So when we look at objects, we don't even actually see the way that things look as they really are, but that are being more or less interpreted through sensory stimuli and through, let's say, you could say mental models or schemas that our minds are constituted by to serve as models of what we experience in the world. And so that we're not really seeing an accurate representation of reality. Instead, what we're seeing is more or less a kind of idiosyncratic worldview that then we have to parse out and try to get a better picture of. And part of the way we do that is through observation and experimentation, and through engaging in dialect with other individuals so that they can also correct when we're making mistakes. Now, the thing that's kind of funny, and then I'll just kind of end it at this point, and just to kind of bring it full circle, is that it's funny because when we're engaging in these dialogues though, and we're having these exchanges, it does feel as though we're kind of coming to know something, that we're correcting mistakes that we've made, and that we're coming to closer to the truth or to knowledge. And the question is, how do we know that that is what we are attaining? Maybe it's that we're sort of more or less emotional, biased creatures that are kind of just in the world as it is, trying to navigate a foreign land in a sense, because I mean, we just kind of pop up one day. We're just sort of here in a society at a time when we had no decision whatsoever to choose what society or time that we've kind of been born into, and that we're these creatures, just human beings who are pre-built with certain physiological structures. And then here we are, we're just kind of engaging with each other. It almost feels like maybe in some way part of what critical thinking is a kind of pragmatic enterprise, where we're trying to come up with better understandings of the world, but we're also just trying to navigate this territory that we find ourselves living in. We're social beings who have to interact with each other, cooperate, trying to keep away cheaters and what would be people who would take advantage of us. And we're living in a large culture and a government that's helping to provide a kind of structure where people can live freely and to have rights and to practice what they want to practice. And then each of us, leisure is the mother of philosophy. So if it wasn't for the fact that we had this time to ourselves, we probably wouldn't be pondering some of the deeper questions of life, like what is the meaning of it all, and like, what do I want to do with myself? We're only able to do such a thing because, well, in large part, we're not being threatened constantly by some kind of ravenous animal that would take advantage, that would eat us. The moment we stepped outside of our house, we have all of that available to us. So I don't know. I guess it's that I think critical thinking is valuable, and we should try and use it and develop it and cultivate it as much as we can. But it also just feels like it's hard to know where it's taking us, and if there's any kind of ultimate reality which is helping us to describe or to capture or to really get at. Maybe where there's nothing out there for us to discover or to know. This is just the way that the way that we're kind of determined to behave in some sense, just because that's the way that we are. It's the way that reality is constituted. The reality is constituted, but I'm contradicting myself in a sense, and that's kind of the beauty and the weirdness of this all, I guess. I'm not hopefully I've explained myself just well enough to have made some points, though, to be honest, reflecting on it, I probably said next to nothing, but that's just how I think. So thank you for the time. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so you said a lot of stuff. I want to try to encourage everyone to stick to one comment, one topic at a time, because I have a lot to cover. So confirmation bias is there for a reason. I agree. We covered that in our confirmation bias evening. So I won't go into it in detail, but I'll say I agree with you that it's there for a reason. It has a purpose. I just would argue that it often in the modern world causes more harm than good, than the good that it does. And then I agree with you that we don't always see things like absolutely with the way that they objectively are. We have misunderstandings all the time, and we just create mental models to understand the world. But I hope we would agree that seeing things through our senses and learning through reason are useful tools, and that our senses do help us when we see, as you pointed out, a 360-degree view and look at things from different perspectives. They help us get a more clear view on objective reality, so that we can learn more knowledge about the objective reality that we live in. And when you say we're coming closer to truth as a group through these conversations, I would argue we are. When you compare us to the people who someone was mentioning earlier are trying to go claw other people's eyes out because they're emotionally angry, those people are not coming closer to the truth. They're just giving in to their emotions, which I would argue doesn't help them in their pursuit of truth. I think we all have an inherent desire to seek truth, and those people are really defending truth with violence in some respects. And I think we all inherently will even use violence to defend truth. It's just that in a modern world, it's not necessary anymore. And so our emotions kind of lead us down the wrong path by trying to tempt us into using violence to find truth. Nowadays, like, because we do have the protection of, at least I think all of us in this event are in, countries with stable governments that have rule of law. And so we're in a place where we can have the stability to be able to, make a living for ourselves and think about philosophical subjects, which I'm, blessed to be able to do. And I hope we all feel like we are. And so, yeah, I think we are slowly and carefully learning more about objective reality as the world moves forward. And Steven Pinker's book, Enlightenment Now, does a good job of saying that we live in the healthiest, wealthiest, safest world that humanity has ever known, which says we're moving in the right direction overall. But we do have a lot of risks. And I will say we should have another event on this, which is that, we're getting more power in the hands of more people. And eventually someone who's, destructive in nature will get the ability to destroy the world. And they may just be having a bad day, but decide to press that big red button and suddenly we're all gone, right? And if we're not careful, I mean, that's the obvious joking extreme, but like there's a point at which much earlier than that, we cross a line where, some crazy person that can amount enough power can, cause a nuclear war. And like we've gotten close to that. We've gotten close to nuclear war with Russia multiple times since nuclear weapons were created. And it was only, from people actually defying authority that we were saved from nuclear holocaust multiple times. So there's a lot to unpack in what you said. And I want to let, is it Ella? So I want to let her go. I think it's, you're on mute, Ella. But thanks for your comments, Daniel. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I would caution against malignment of emotion as not holding truth and knowing. Viktor Frankl talked about the importance of anger to drive social justice inclinations, that raging against what is harmful is a really critical activator. It generates action. Anger can generate action, necessary action. There are other efforts we see in the world in revolution against inhumane actions, and how important these moments have been to human history. And voting on the right side of history. Of course, if people hold humanitarian objectives as important, and that's a value judgment too. So I would just caution against maligning emotion as its own, as not being its own intelligence. And again, it's activation towards a more humane, civilized existence. I think also we often hear emotions like anger. I think of veterans, for instance, coming into an office outraged by an issue around care, for instance. And they could be emoting so they're not heard, but it doesn't mean that the kernel of truth that they're emoting about isn't truth. It doesn't have weight and value. And so it may be massaging the message so that the rest of the world who is not victim to that experience of harm can hear it, because they're the ones with the power often. But again, I think of the many ways in which emotions tell the truth. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. And I wasn't meaning to say that emotions are bad or have no use. Like, I think there's a lot of benefits to emotions. In fact, psychological studies show that human beings who feel no emotions can't make decisions. They can't even choose what to eat for breakfast. Like, they literally can't decide Cheerios or cornflakes. So we need some emotions to be able to take action. And without that, you know, like we're almost helpless. And so you're right that emotions can create action. All I'm suggesting, and it's a Stoic approach, is Stoic like as in actually Stoicism, not Stoic as in ignore your emotions, which is a common misunderstanding of the actual ancient Greek philosophy. I'm talking about the ancient Greek philosophy, which, you know, when I channeled it and sort of interpreted it myself, my way of dealing with emotions is to understand the emotion, to look at it objectively, to accept what I'm feeling, and then look for the root cause of my emotions. And if it's a positive emotion that I'm feeling, understand what created that positive emotion and cultivate the root causes of that positive emotion. If it's a negative emotion that I'm feeling, you know, try to understand what caused that negative emotion and try to prevent the root causes of me feeling that negative emotion. And in basically dealing with the root causes of the emotion, rather than giving in to the emotional desire, I think we end up with better outcomes. And all I would say is that, doing that is a better way rather than doing what your emotions compel you to do immediately, which, as someone mentioned earlier, they wanted to scratch other people's eyes out. That, you know, that to me is not the right answer. What's the right answer is what I said in the beginning of the event, which is ask them why they think what they think, right? Yes, be angry, be upset, but calm down long enough to understand and empathize with the person you're angry at, to listen to them and understand their perspective, rather than to yell at them and scream at them and tell them that they're wrong and that they're a bad person, right? All, like the ancient Greeks said, every man thinks he's a good man, and they only talked about men then, but it's really every person thinks they're a good person. It's really only when we have misunderstandings that someone ends up doing something that the rest of us see as bad. And so I would argue that everybody thinks that they're doing the right thing. It's just about what is the right thing and seeing the truth more clearly that get people in trouble and end up having people do the wrong thing. I don't think anyone gets up and says, I just want to be the worst human being that I can. I am born to be bad, and that's how they were born from the beginning of their life. If someone gets to that mindset, it was through lots of misunderstandings along the way that they got there. Ellis, go ahead.
Hi, I was going to say it's a little bit after 8:30, so if anyone hasn't spoken yet, now's a good time to raise your hand. And just to let you all know, next week we're discussing, is having kids good, bad, or neutral? We're going to talk about the decline in population. And the week after that, we're going to be talking about the education system. So we hope you all RSVP for those events.
Great, thanks, Ellis. Will, go ahead.
Thanks, Garrett. Well, at the risk of sounding unctuous, I just wanted to say how much work you put in, how greatly appreciated it is. And I think we should all acknowledge just what a wonderful job you do. And I sound like I'm being a bit fawning and unctuous saying that, but it's brilliant stuff. And
if they come regularly, Will, they'll know you give me a hard time just as much. So I appreciate it. So,
well, you need agitators sometimes, don't you, to
of
move
course,
forward?
like,
it's great. I love it.
You know, we're all
here
to seek truth, right? And I am too. And if I only wanted people that agreed with me, then I wouldn't be seeking truth. I want people that say what's right and what's wrong. And I want us to do that together as a group. And we'll all help each other seek truth more effectively if we collaborate on it. So, and it's only by looking for people who disagree with us that we can get a better understanding of the world, as Daniel said, where we look at things from a 360-degree perspective. So, but thank you for your comments, Will. I do put a lot of effort into these, and so I appreciate the comment.
And it's such a good thing, you know, I think it's such a good concept that you've introduced, to try and listen to other people's views, because like they should teach that really at school. Try and see where they're coming from. Would make the world such a better place. Yeah, excellent stuff.
Yeah, it's so important to listen. Like we really need more listeners in this world. I like the saying, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk. It should be more than that, because there are so many other people in this world. And the truth is, we learn nothing by restating our beliefs or telling people why we're right. We only learn when we listen to other people with an open mind towards seeking truth. And so, you know, we're not learning by telling other people they're wrong. We're learning by listening to other people with an open mind. So, you know, listening is like a really important skill that I hope we can all sort of take away from tonight. If we take away anything, it's listen.
Listen to everything they've got to say, and then tell them why they're blatantly wrong. But yeah, give it a go.
Jokes aside, listen to everything they say, and then ask them thoughtful questions to like dig down to the root causes. And we'll talk about this in one of our conversations on critical thinking. Is for me, what it's about is digging down to someone's axioms, the things that they just assume are true because they're not logically provable. They're just things that have to be assumptions. They're so base that they're the core assumptions. If you can get someone down to their core assumptions and all the logic that they use to build up from that, you've truly understood their perspective. If you're not there, you're just delving on the surface, right? Saying, you know, pro-life or pro-choice is a surface level discussion. You know, if you start to talk about, well, when does life become important to you? That becomes like a level below the surface, right? When is life meaningful? At what point? What is the moment in time that life becomes meaningful to you as a person? And, you know, we had that conversation on the topic on abortion. And so the listening becomes key, is to like understand each person's perspective and why they came to the conclusions they did. And that's why, you know, we have, you know, most of our sessions on the Free Thinker Institute events are about, you know, open conversation. It's, you know, usually more than half conversation and less about presentation, because we should all be listening to each other. And sure, I tried to present stuff that I hope was helpful, and I hope people learn from it. I always love to know if people learned anything from the presentation. So if anyone did, I would love comments in the chat if you learned anything from the presentation about critical thinking skills. You know, I do think that the listening to each other is, you know, sometimes the most fun and valuable part.
Yeah, it can come to compromises too.
Yeah, and you don't have to agree. That's the thing. Like, we've gotten afraid to, like, people don't like to agree to disagree anymore. And I would argue, if you've both understood each other's perspective and you just have different fundamental assumptions, then it's okay to agree to disagree, right? And we should be okay with that. Like, we don't have to agree on everything, and we can still be friends with people we disagree with.
That's right. And often, you know, you disagree with someone, and that you see it a lot, and the walls go up and they never sort of communicate again. It happens a lot, but it can also be a measure of a friendship too. I've found, even with family members, we have a big debate or argument, but you still talk, you know, a day or two later, you get back to it. It's a measure of a friendship too. Can be.
It is. No, it's a great point. And like, I think that it's important to be able to have different opinions and beliefs from people we know, because what tends to happen is, if we cut off every relationship where we have a disagreement with someone else, I mean, how many people do we have 100% of alignment philosophically with? Like, almost no one has 100% philosophical alignment with someone else. If you're both being authentic and you're both sharing your true opinions, you're going to have disagreements with people. And so it becomes critical to having positive relationships, to be able to, you know, listen and understand each other, but also be able to agree to disagree and be able to still be at peace with that. And it's a key to having positive relationships, is to be able to agree to disagree without having it hurt the relationship. As long as there's not a betrayal of trust, then it's fine to agree to disagree. Like, you don't have to agree on all areas with all people. And we won't.
Yep, well said.
Anyone have
if you're wanting to wind up now, Garrett, or not? I'm not, you know, I don't want to keep prolonging things if you've gone over time. So
yeah, we're not over time. We still have 15 minutes left, but I'm also open to ending early if people don't have other questions. So it might be the first time we did that, but I don't know. Like, was it also clear? Like, if people not have other questions or comments on critical thinking skills?
I think
maybe people aren't putting their hands up because they realize that we personally have no cognitive biases. It's everyone else is the problem.
We all have cognitive biases. So
except me, obviously.
Oh yeah, right. Except us, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's everyone else that's the problem, not me. That's a typical story. Abe, you had your hand up earlier, and then you were just speaking up. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think we lose our critical thinking skills as we grow up. Like you look at a child, he asks you the most basic questions. Why? And after a certain stage, it becomes like, you're asking me stupid questions. Like I still remember reading this biography of Einstein, and which he says, like when everybody else grew up, I was still a child.
Yeah.
And that was a very interesting thing. I mean, he would walk around asking basic questions, or for that matter, even Isaac Newton. Just imagine an apple falling on his head and you asking, like, why did the apple fall on my head? Why didn't it go the other way?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Abe. I think children are so curious. My kids are 6 and they ask a lot of questions, and I love it. And I look stuff up. Now I look stuff up on ChatGPT, quite frankly, because it's even faster than Google. And so, I sometimes I do Google Images if they want pictures of stuff. But like, I do think we're all born with an inherent curiosity, desire to seek truth, to be good people, and to be fair. I think we all recognize fairness from unfairness. Inherently, it's only through misunderstandings that we accumulate throughout our lives that we do things that are unfair, quite frankly, or by not listening to our conscience, we do things that are unfair. And so I agree with you, Abe. I think we're born with a lot of good reasoning skills, and it's learned behavior to have corruption in reasoning, but it can also be learned behavior to have clarity in reasoning. And that's what this series is about that we're kicking off tonight. It's about clarity in thinking and clarity in reasoning, and critical thinking is all about that, is clarity in thinking and reasoning, so that we can learn to rely on our own judgment, really with a high degree of certainty, but always an openness to being fallible.
I was reading about this thing about evolution. I mean, the evolution, rest of the world was teaching evolution in school. And I think we started teaching evolution somewhere in 1972, somewhere in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court got involved and said, you can't be teaching evolution, it's the wrong theory.
Right.
And then they had the monkey trials. They bought this whole thing and said, I think in 1996, I think they had this monkey trial somewhere at Delaware saying that, evolution is wrong. We can't be teaching that. We didn't come from apes and all that stuff. I was quite surprised. Even in 1996, people couldn't believe in this theory of evolution. And then comes last year, in which the one who won the Nobel Prize in medicine was somebody who came up with the theory of evolution. And we still are here debating about evolution and whether it should be taught in schools.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And actually it brings me back to an event we had, I think it was last year, on how science is compatible with spirituality and religion if you look at it the right way, which is essentially that once science has a really solid opinion of something, you believe science, because religion and spirituality are what I called inconsistent philosophies, whereas science is a consistent philosophy. So science is more solid, but it's slower moving, but science is constantly evolving, whereas spirituality and religion are a great place to go when there's not a good scientific answer. When there's a really good, solid scientific answer, and a lot of people do this just intuitively, and they're spiritual people or religious people, but they still are scientists, and they can make sense of both of it. And the way that I think they do it is exactly what I propose, which is when science has a really good answer for something, trust science. But when science is in doubt, or there is not a clear answer about from science on something, then be open to spiritual, religious, philosophical beliefs. And I would argue that if my essay on free will is right, which the essay I linked to about coping with the death of a loved one is the one on reincarnation that DLJ was asking for, without going into details, it's just named differently, but that is the essay that you were looking for on reincarnation. Is that shoot, I lost my train of thought. Let me just let Susan go, because we're getting late in the night and I must be getting tired. So Susan, why don't you go ahead and then we'll go to Ella.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Garrett. Now, I wanted to ask you how to handle anger. You see, during critical thinking, you know that injustice, it's not right. For example, foreclosure. You know that the people that have the listing on the sheriff's sale, they are in some kind of trouble. They behind their mortgage, right? So there are people with money coming in, and they wanted to buy their house. So that means the people are going to be on the street, you see. And then they continue to do that. They advertise the house without your consent. They sell a part of your house without you being there. You was in the hospital, you were sick, you were in jail, you're not there, and they just sell part of the tax that you're not able to pay, right? And for the public, and they invest in that. I have a friend in Philadelphia. He's got a partner that asking him to go and buy houses and then flip over and make a profit, right? He said, no, because he understands the problem of homelessness in our country. So I am so angry about that, because I think my friend declined that. My friend said that, no, I will invest in something else. People need to invest their money. They want to make money, right? But on the other people, unfortunate event, only other people down and out, you see. So how do I handle that? How does a critical thinking will help me? How can I think critically? Okay. How can I ask him in my normal voice, right?
So this is complicated, Susan. Let me try to answer as quickly as I can.
Yeah.
First of all, as far as how to handle anger, I would look for the root causes of what's making you angry, and then separate what's in your control from what's out of your control. And part of this is about creating mental models. In your case, you had a long period of time where you were, trying to pay the bills. And the mental model that I would have recommended back then would have been, if I don't pay my bills, then I'm not going to be able to maintain my home. And therefore, I need to, find a job and do anything and everything I can within my control to find a job ASAP so that I can continue to pay my bills. But that's hindsight, right? But now looking back in hindsight, that might make a lot of sense. But now where you are, you have to look at what you can do that's in your control now. And, look at, what can you do to make, the future as positive as possible. And that's all, all you can do is, I like to say, I come up with pithy sayings. I think a lot of you guys know. One is do your best and accept the rest. So look at what you can do now to make the best of the situation you're in, do your best, and then accept where you land, but make sure you've tried your best to make the most out of the situation you have. So all I would say is look at the root causes of what's making you angry and try to handle those root causes rather than doing what anger may make you want to do, because giving into anger's natural inclination of action is usually the wrong answer. And that's all I was saying when I wasn't meaning to malalign emotions in general, but just to say that the emotional response is very often not the best response to do. If someone says I'm going to hold on to my guns with my cold dead hands, and I get angry at them and say, you're supporting, child murders around the country, that's not the right answer, right? That's like shooting back at them and hitting them hard, with an accusation that, probably they don't really believe that. What I should do is say, well, why is that so important to you? And so again, just not giving into the emotional desire, but to look at the root causes of the emotions and what can you do in your control to make your future better. And we can talk more about that offline if you don't mind.
Yeah. I have one more question.
If you don't mind, just raise your hand and let's let Ella go next if you could, and then raise your hand, and then we'll have you go right after Ella. So
I'm okay to defer to her if she was going to speak anyway. If this ties to her, I'm okay to wait.
Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, just one question. Is there a difference between collecting a debt and foreclosure a house? Because this debt is the real property tax, and they sell it to the public, and the public have the right to lien on my house. It's the law. It's a law in the state. So I wanted to know rule of law, right? How many set rule of law there is, because that is against rule of law. I don't have enough income. I don't pay. Not like I'm sitting on a pile of crap and I evade the tax. That's different. But they allow the people to lien on your house.
Susan,
Collecting the debt,
Susan,
I owe the IRS.
Susan, if you don't pay your taxes, you do
Yes.
get in trouble. So, and you do
Yes.
lose your property if you don't pay your property tax. So that is actually a law.
What kind of law is that? That is kind of inhumane. I explained my financial situation, right? I was in prison.
Susan,
I
I don't want to digress on that subject.
Yeah.
Like tonight, we can talk about it offline if you want, but
Yeah.
Yes. it is a law, and you can look it up, but we can talk about it more offline. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. No problem. Go ahead, Ella.
So may I actually make one response to the conversation that just happened?
Sure.
Okay. So, and I think I forgot my original comment, but I'll get to it. It'll come back. I would also consider other options, for instance, understanding the systemic impact that people with privilege of income will have more leverage than those without is important. And maybe connecting with other people in similar situations, maybe housing advocates, maybe there are other advocates, because when one is a single person trying to critically think through a situation like that, when there's a systemic oppression, it's really hard to have any sense of agency, I think, for a lot of people, and they may not know all the options. So I would connect with agencies or organizations organizing, maybe community organizing, if that can be found, to also problem solve, because I think one of the fallacies is that we know everything, or we have that kind of control, when really there's a whole bigger system that knows a lot more than us. So anything that can help generate answers that we may not be aware of, or just to know that we don't have the answers, and try to suss out what avenues there might be to problem solve that we may not be aware of. Because a lot of times also people are in these, we act like we're individuals, and or in individual situations, when we really, it's a collective issue. So, and the divide and conquer experience is that, we have to deal with all of these hardships alone, or we're left dealing with them alone, when there could be more strength in connecting with others who share that experience and may have wisdom getting through it. And then the other question is like the idea of get a job, make some money, and pay it off and do the best you can, also has a certain amount of privilege to it. If someone is disabled, if someone is elderly, a lot of people displaced are elderly who can't get a second job, physically wouldn't be hired if they could. And so there's often a lot of privilege embedded in who can make critically, I guess, a lot of privilege in who has the efficacy to maintain balanced emotions, I suppose, is one way to put it. When you're in an oppressed or hurt situation, when you're in a victim status, because it's actually victim status, like you just have less leverage, then one may be more reactive. And so I think just honoring that is important. And again, connecting with others who understand that experience and where that can be validated, because I think often we're going to get feedback from others that our experience is not valid, and that we're weak, or that we maybe deserve what happens, and this is the economy, this is capitalism, all of that messaging. And it's just important, I think, for any of us who are in that situation, and all of us will be at some point, I imagine, unless someone is really lucky, everyone's going to be in a position of not having leverage. And so just connecting with what the kernel of truth is in that anger is really important, or whatever emotion is coming up that may not be palatable to those with power around us. So thanks.
Yeah, no, I think great points, Ella. I think, you know, Susan, I hope you were listening carefully, because I do think looking for, you know, not-for-profits, and I think you've been in touch with some. Last we talked about, you were in touch with a lot of resources to try to help you in your situation. And Ella, I know Susan pretty well for some time now. You know, I do think that she is, you know, or like was capable of getting a job, but if she felt like she was not, then being on disability is another option. And, you know, I didn't think about it until recently, but another option would be selling the house before you go into default. But now it's too late for that too. So, but like in hindsight, like selling the house and then downsizing to a smaller place would have been another potential avenue. But again, that's no longer in your control. So, you know, we're past that point. But I think Ella had a lot of good suggestions and things to consider. There are a lot of resources available to people who need help, and you should definitely avail yourself of them. And I know you have to a large degree, but there's probably more that you can look for. And so that said, I do want to kind of close out because it's 9 o'clock, and I've been up since very early. So this is our end time, and so I do like to honor that as well. So I do want to encourage everyone to come back next week. We will be talking about whether having kids is good, bad, or neutral. There are people who are anti-natalists that think we should not have kids, pro-natalists that think we should have kids, or some people that say it's neutral. And we'll have a conversation about that. And then the week after that, we'll talk about the education system. And the week after that, we'll talk about prisons, whether they're best used for punishment or rehabilitation. That'll be a more global discussion, comparing and contrasting different parts of, you know, different systems of prison systems in the world. So, Ella, did you have another thing that you wanted to say before we close out? Or was your hand up from before?
I'm sorry, it was up from before.
Okay, no problem. So I just want to thank everybody for the great conversation, really interesting comments, questions, and you know, I always enjoy these. Would love to see people chatting in the online community between these events on Tuesday evenings, and would love to see a lot of you back next week. So thanks a lot for coming, and feedback is always welcome. I'm hoping that we'll send out a survey, although we don't always do it. Hopefully we will, and we would love your feedback so that we can keep improving events. Thanks a lot, everybody, and hope you have a great night.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Ellie. Thanks, Garrett. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.